Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Okay, welcome to Preserving Families today. We're so grateful that you're here. We're really excited about this episode because we have a special guest who we think is awesome, and I'll introduce her in just a second. We just wanted to follow up with our discussion from last week. We talked about fairness in families, and again, talking about that principle that life's not fair, or, how come somebody in the family gets to do something that I'm not doing? But today we thought we would transition that to marriage, fairness in marriage, because this is something that we're hearing a lot of. And actually, the reason I got this idea is in our family, we have 8 daughters and me, and we have a Marco Polo channel, and we're always talking about whatever. And sometimes I'll get on 2 days later and I'll have missed 200 Marco Polos. I'm always trying to play catch up with Marco Polo, but it's a great place, a way that we connect as a family and sisters on Marco Polo and have fun discussing everything from, who knows, whatever the topic of the day.
I would say from child rearing to politics to what happened at the elementary school that day.
Just any issue.
Yeah, probably too much. We're on it too much, probably.
And a couple weeks ago, Bethany started talking about this principle of fairness in marriage, and that she's heard a lot of from her peers and in the culture that we live in. I thought Bethany is so wise and smart. This is our third daughter, Bethany, that she needs to be on our podcast discussing this because, again, she's got her undergrad in marriage and family, and she's a mom of 5 beautiful children. She lives in Arkansas. But one thing that we always say about Bethany is she is very wise and she is very articulate. And so we thought she would be a great guest on the podcast today to talk about this principle of fairness in marriage. So Bethany, thank you and welcome to the podcast today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I don't know if any of that's true. I don't think I'm wise.
You are.
But I have learned a few principles from other people along the way that can be applied to fairness in marriage and what we're hearing these days from our peers. And so yes, on our Marco Polo chat a few weeks ago, we were talking about how it's not uncommon to hear other wives talk about things like, oh, I did the dishes tonight, so I'm going to leave the dishes for my husband tomorrow. Or I woke up with the baby, so the next time the baby wakes up, my husband, I made my husband get up with them. Or I changed the dirty diaper right now, so I'm going to make my husband change the dirty diaper next time. Anyway, and you hear a lot of like 50-50. I give 50, my husband should give 50.
Kind of that tit for tat mentality, right? Like,
if you get to do this, like Bethany, if I go golfing with some buddies this afternoon, that means mom gets to go somewhere with her buddies tomorrow, right?
Is that for equal amount of time?
Yes, exactly. You hear a lot of that. My husband was gone on a work trip, so I deserve a trip with my girlfriends when he gets home because I've been home with the kids all day or all weekend. And
Bethany, I hear that a lot too, just on social media, on funny memes, on things like that. I think it is a really big cultural thing. I honestly don't hear that as much among my peers and my friends of people my age. But why do you think that is such a big deal with your generation and your peer group?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think gender roles are changing. A lot more women are working outside the home or picking up side hustles. So I think now it's the mentality of, well, since I'm working too, I shouldn't also have all the household responsibility. So they're expecting their husbands to pitch in a lot more. And I'm not against husbands pitching in. I think it's great. I think husbands do pitch in a lot more now than they did 20 or 30 years ago, which that's not a bad thing. I think what's bad is when we get in this mindset that everything has to be equal. Like you said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, tit for tat. If you do this, then I get to do this. if you go golfing, then I get to do this. If I change this diaper, then you have to do this.
You change the
I
next
think that
one.
can be a dangerous mindset to get in. And I would even argue a terrestrial mindset. And we can get into that in a minute.
Yes, I think that's really true. I think what you're saying is so interesting because, years and years ago, like back in my, let's say, grandparents' day, the men just went to the office and came home, and the wife had dinner ready, the slippers and a pipe in their hand, and handed it to him, and he sat on the couch the rest of the night. And over the years, responsibilities have changed a lot. Like you said, especially as women have gone into the workplace now, and there's more dual income couples. But I even
Yeah.
know over the years, men have helped more, right? Changing
Yeah.
diapers, doing the more domestic things. And I was appreciative of anything, that when dad was home, he was pretty good at helping. But now I think it's expected. I think this generation has this weird expectation that it has to be 50-50, that everything, whether the wife works or not, I feel like
Yeah.
see this weird expectation. And I'm just wondering maybe where that comes from. And I think you addressed it well that, because women are working, they expect them to do equal.
Yeah. They still
Even if they're
expect their,
stay-at-home moms, they expect their husband to help completely with all the domestic responsibilities.
Which is really interesting, guys, because what family life research tells us is that even if mom works, and if she works full time, she still will do most of the work in the house. That part hasn't really equaled out, which is really interesting, right? So moms aren't being helped as much at home. So you could see sometimes, as we try to identify where some of this resentment may come in, some of it could be that maybe husbands don't do as much at home as wives wish they would.
yeah. So as we were talking with the rest of my sisters, we all were kind of sharing experiences of different things we've seen. And one of the sisters was talking about one of her friends had posted on social media, kind of bragging about how her and her husband split the household chores 50-50, and kind of bragging about this, like, and like she's got this marriage thing all figured out. But yeah, I don't look at that as goals, as like what a marriage should be like. I think there's a higher way, a holier way, a more celestial way, a more celestial approach to marriage. And I would argue that trying to make everything fair and split everything 50-50 is more of a terrestrial law. So when I was in the MTC years ago, 14 years ago, my branch president at the time, this was a principle that he really hit hard on. He liked to teach what's the difference between celestial people who go to the celestial kingdom, and people who go to the terrestrial kingdom, which is, kind of interesting. But he taught that people in the terrestrial kingdom are people who love everything to be fair, right? Everything, like they like the civil laws, justice, and yes, tit for tat. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Everything, they want everything to be fair. And whereas celestial people who will go to the celestial kingdom, they serve because they love others, because they love God, and they don't expect anything in return. And he told the story about his kids, because he taught this principle to his kids a lot, and it almost kind of turned into a joke in their family where they would just throw out celestial and terrestrial all the time. But one of the rules in his family was after dinner, everyone had a dinner chore, and you had to do your dinner chore before you went on to do any other activity that night or your homework or whatever. And so one night it was his oldest daughter's turn to do the dishes after dinner, and something came up where her friends came over, and there was some fun party going on, or maybe it was they got tickets to a concert. I don't know, something where they had to go and they had to leave immediately, and the older daughter wanted to go with her friends. And so the dad said, well, the rule is you have to do your dinner chore. And so the oldest daughter turns to her siblings and says, can anyone do the dishes for me? And the younger daughter, who was probably 12 at the time, says, Oh, okay, I'll do the dishes for you if you do the dishes for me tomorrow. And the oldest sister goes, "Oh, thank you. That was so celestial of you." And she leaves with her friends and goes and has goes and has fun. And so as the younger daughter, the 12-year-old sitting there doing the dishes that night, she turns to her dad and says, that wasn't really celestial of me. And he goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, if it was really celestial, I wouldn't have made her do my dishes tomorrow. I would have just done them for her."
Oh.
Anyway, so I thought that was a really cute story and really demonstrates we can apply it to marriage. The difference between a celestial marriage and a terrestrial marriage would be, I'll do the dishes today, but you got them tomorrow. Whereas opposed to a celestial marriage would be, I got this, honey. I got the dishes. You go, you had a hard day at work today. You go enjoy being with the kids. Like I'll do the dishes.
So, Bethy, you're not really, this the idea that we're not keeping score, right? There's no score being kept of
Yes,
who's been able to do what and who had this chance and this opportunity. It's purely, really, it's sacrifice brings forth the blessings of heaven, right? But it's sacrifice that helps us to love each other on a deeper level.
exactly. Yes.
And I think if we're talking about marriages today, and I think in a marriage, that if we go into the mindset of having a 50-50 tit for tat, we're not looking to serve and help and build our family. We're looking to see what can I get out of, or what can I,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, not have to do versus what can I do to build our family. And if, as a married couple, if we're trying to build our little Zion here and build our family, that we both need to be putting, I hate the 50-50 thing. We both should be putting 100 to make our
Right.
family work, because we're the only two. If we're not, if the both of us are not invested in this, we're not going to have a family. Our family is
Right.
just going to be splintered, and our kids are going to learn to do that. But if we're both investing 100 and not keeping track, not keeping score, then that's when things, work out.
Kind of reminds me of like a business partnership as opposed to a marriage, like if you're expecting to split everything halfway all the time and making sure if you're so concerned about your spouse doing the equal amount of work as you. And so we can actually turn to the scriptures to learn more about this terrestrial celestial concept. If we go to the Sermon on the Mount, so I'm in 3rd Nephi chapter 12, verse 21. So this text, the Sermon on the Mount, teaches us how it's like a good, better, best
Mm.
text, right? Kind of teaches how to go from bad to good and good to better, or we could say from how to go from telestial to terrestrial to celestial. And so in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is teaching the old law and then the holier and higher way. So if we go to verse 21 in 3rd Nephi 12, it says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, and it is also written before you, that thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment of God." The telestial law or person would be someone who kills, right? And then the terrestrial would be don't kill, right? That's becoming good, or we
Yeah,
don't kill people. But the better thing to do is in verse 22. "But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother shall be in danger of his judgment, and whosoever shall say to his brother Raca shall be in danger of the council, and whosoever shall say thou fool shall be in danger of hellfire." So he's saying don't even get angry, right?
yeah.
Don't even let yourself go there. So another example is in verse 27. "Behold, it is written by them of old time that thou shalt not commit adultery." So a telestial person would commit adultery, or sorry, a telestial person would commit adultery. A terrestrial person would not commit adultery. But what's the higher law? The celestial law is in verse 28, "But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery already in his heart." So the higher law is don't even let your mind go there, right? Anyway, so then we can come over here to verse 38. And it says, behold, it is written, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye shall not resist evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So we can look at that and say, that sounds really unfair, doesn't it? Like, and it's very against our carnal man nature to do that. But Jesus is telling us to give him the other cheek as well. And then where this really ties in for me, verse 41, I never knew what this meant until recently. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. So from my understanding, back in the day, in Jesus's day, a Roman soldier could take any Jew he wanted or grab any Jew off the street and say, you have to walk with me a mile and like carry all my stuff for me. And so that's like really unfair, right?
That's
Like
not fair.
why should that, why should a Jew have to do that for a Roman? But that was the law. And Jesus teaches us to go the mile, but go with him, not only go the mile, but go with him twain, meaning go an extra mile with him. And so what Jesus is teaching us here is, I don't think he cares that much about fairness, right? It's not,
But
yeah,
just the
he's
idea of
teaching us.
turning the other cheek doesn't feel fair, right? That when someone abuses you, to just turn around and walk away, we're like, no, aren't you supposed to punch somebody or yell or scream or? So yeah, Bethy, I think you're right. Jesus doesn't seem to care much about fairness.
Yeah. And so he's telling us to give more of ourselves, even when we think it's unfair. We think in our minds the fair thing would be, no, since I just changed this diaper, you got the next one. The Christ-like thing to do, the celestial thing to do would change the next dirty diaper and the next one after that.
And not even
Or,
complain about it, right?
yeah, because you're serving and you're,
I think that's what it means to become a saint. I mean, we are becoming saints. We become true disciples of Christ. The marriage experience and the family experience become the laboratory where we learn how to develop Christ-like traits and attributes. If we don't learn them there, where else are we going to learn? Bethy, that's great. I love what you're sharing from the Sermon on the Mount right out of the Book of Mormon. And then in verse 48, maybe the most quoted verse in the equivalent of Matthew chapter 5, verse 48 about, be therefore perfect. I think a lot of us get caught up in what that really means. Unfortunately, many people are thinking of perfection in the sense of how we would use that word today, but the context of those verses, Jesus is talking about love. He's talking about loving your enemies and blessing those, doing good to them that hate you and despitefully use you. But he's talking about the principle of love. And I think the idea here is that we can be perfect in love. We can't be perfect people. We can't be Jesus, but we can be perfect in love in the way that we show love. We can be perfect in the way that we sacrifice and love our partner more than we love ourselves. And that's where real love actually happens in my mind at that level.
Bethany, I loved that about the Sermon on the Mount. Thanks for that. There's some things you taught us that I've never thought about before, and I love that. It makes me think about the psychologist Brene Brown, and she's used the example too before in her marriage about because both she and her husband work full time, have a lot going on, they have children, and she says that there are nights when she comes home and she is just gone. Like she's just beat. She has had a horrible day. Everything's gone wrong. She's exhausted. And she and her husband have this kind of a deal worked out, which I love. It's not a 50-50 deal, but it's like, honey, I am running on a solid 20% tonight. Can you pick up my slack? And as you talked about being a celestial partner, he'll look at her and say, sure, honey, I've got it. You go in the office or go take a hot bath. I'll do dinner. I'll run the kids to soccer practice. I got this. But then there'll be nights when he's had a bad day or a rough day. And he'll come home and say, honey, I can't. I just got handed a huge project that's due tomorrow. I'm running on nothing. And she'll say, honey, I got it. I'll take it. there's nights she says they both are running on nothing. And
Yeah, what do you do then?
yeah, and I love when she says this. She said, "We'll look at each other," and she just said, "It's not happening tonight." She said, "We'll get on, we'll order food. We call the soccer coach and say, we're not coming, like we're just shutting down, that it's just been one of those days." But they've talked this through and worked it out ahead of time where they know, how to help each other and how to build a celestial marriage, if you want to call it. I love that you're calling it that because a telestial would be like, well, sorry, honey, I'm tired too, or whatever. Or a terrestrial would be like, okay, I'll do it for you, but tomorrow you better,
You're on tomorrow.
yeah, you better pull up
Right.
and pull through tomorrow. But celestial would be like, honey, it's okay. I've got you. I got this because again, we're a team. We're not opposing foes. And I feel like the 50-50 is you're almost like enemies or, like you said, maybe employees or teamwork or it's a contract. But when you're working together for the benefit of your marriage and your family, then you're a team.
It reminds me, guys, of I don't think our kids did this, but maybe they did. But you hear those stories about the siblings when they're young, and they draw a line with tape or something down the middle of the room.
Yeah.
Whatever's on this side is mine, on this side is yours, and you don't cross the line. And if you do cross the line, oh my gosh, you're anyway. It's just kind of that type of mentality, right? Where you're not working together, you're actually working against each other.
Right. And I love the whole premise that you've taught us about the telestial, terrestrial, and celestial. And I'm going to start seeing things better that way. I love that because
It's a great lens.
yeah, it's a great lens to see
Yeah.
our marriage through.
Yeah, for sure. Your Brene Brown story reminded me of a story from my own life. A few years ago, when I had my fourth kid, Zach, I had him November 29th, really close to Christmas. So the week leading up to Christmas, I was at my 3 week postpartum mark. And for me, that's always when it's the worst.
It just hits.
That's when you're just the most tired and the honeymoon phase is worn off of having a newborn. And at 3 weeks, you're just like, that's at my worst postpartum for me for sure. And so that just happened to fall the week leading up to Christmas. But we also, living here in Arkansas, had a huge ice storm that came through. So not only was I already, emotionally depressed and feeling baby blues, but then this ice storm came through and we couldn't even leave the house because it was like so icy. So we couldn't even go outside and go for a walk or get fresh air. And so I was just in a really bad mental state. But anyway, I didn't want to tell Will because Will was also really struggling mentally at that time with his job and had a lot of anxiety. He just had started a new job and hated it, and it was really taxing. So it was kind of at that point where we were both like, like Brene Brown said, where you're both kind of running on zero. And I was just really nervous for like, how are we going to make Christmas magical for our kids? Because like I haven't even thought about Christmas Eve or like what we're gonna do to have fun. And so a few nights before Christmas, I unloaded on Will and I was like, I have to be honest, I'm not in a good mental place. Like I don't I don't feel the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't I'm just not doing well. I don't know how to make Christmas magical for our kids. And like there's so many things I just don't even know where to begin. And so he was my knight in shining armor and came in and was, don't worry, honey, I got this mentality. And he just took it from there. And the next thing I know, he's taking all the kids out sledding and building a snow fort with them. And Christmas Eve, he planned out a bunch of fun games and activities to do with the kids. And then Christmas morning, he actually my wedding ring had been broken for a few years and he surprised me and fixed it. I just one of those examples of a time when we were both struggling, but he
Rose above, kind of.
yeah, rose above
Dug in
and
deep.
realized even though we were both struggling, he was going to put aside his own, struggles and serve me and serve the kids. And anyway, and so but I don't want to give off the wrong idea that our marriage is perfect and it's always like that, because trust me, I feel like these these terrestrial thoughts of, oh, that's so not fair. And why am I doing this? I always do this. Your turn now. And those enter my thoughts so much. And I'm not perfect. And I'm sure I've said things like that plenty in our marriage of your turn now. And but
We all have. That's human nature.
yeah, but I think the point we're trying to make is having this, there's just a higher and holier way to come at a marriage than trying to divide everything equally. And it's trying to be there for each other and take the burdens off each other and help where you can and give more of yourself than you think is possible.
I love that, Bethany. As you were talking, the word that came to me was charity. That true love never faileth, and the fact that he loved you so much that he knew that it was his time to step up despite his own issues and things that he was dealing with. But I think if we really have love and charity in marriage, that's what we do for each other. We don't keep score. We don't do the tit for tat. We don't think selfishly. We think, what can I do to serve that other person? Versus my own needs, even when things are hard. And so that totally, just that word, as you were telling that story, just I kept thinking of charity. That's what charity is. And if we
Yeah.
have that, that's how we, build on our marriages, and that's how we have a great marriage. It doesn't come through selfishness and thinking, well, what about me?
Right. Go ahead, Dad.
Well, no, I was going to say, Mom thought about charity as she was listening to you, and I thought about this idea of Christ-like character. I think Will demonstrated some great Christ-like character that night. And Elder Bednar, is the one that really put that concept on the map of this idea of the character of Christ. But he said perhaps the greatest indicator of character is the capacity to recognize and appropriately respond to other people who are experiencing the very challenge or adversity that is most immediately and forcefully pressing upon us. Character is revealed, for example, in the power to discern the suffering of other people when we ourselves are suffering, and the ability to detect the hunger in others when we are hungry, or in the power to reach out and extend compassion for the spiritual agony of others when we are in the midst of our own spiritual distress. And thus, character is demonstrated by looking and reaching outward when the natural and instinctive response is to be self absorbed and to turn inward. If such a capacity is indeed the ultimate criterion of moral character, then the Savior of the world is the perfect example of such a consistent and charitable character. And so I love that idea because in marriage and in family life, we don't feel good all the time. We don't feel good mentally, or we feel poorly emotionally, and sometimes we're just worn out physically. But that's when you dig in deep and you find a way to be kind and Christ-like and give a charitable response to a partner when you don't really feel like it.
Yeah, you that quote just makes me think that, and it's just in the little things too, right? It's not like you have to do grand gestures, but it's those times when you could really use a foot rub, but your husband could too, so you rub his feet instead of ask for a foot rub. But it's just things like that. Small things.
Absolutely. I really do think it's the small things. It's just going over and doing dishes when maybe you've done them anyway for the past week, or taking the garbage out even though that's not your job, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever we deem each other's jobs, but just to fill in where we need, because that's what a marriage is. That's what a family is
Yeah.
just pitching in and not keeping score, because there's no way to keep score.
Yeah.
Yeah, your quote, Dad, also talking about the character of Christ, tying this all in together. I used to hate that quote, and you can probably tell me who said this, but I think one of the apostles said something like, any two righteous people can make a marriage work.
President
Who said
Kimball.
President Kimball. And I used to hate that quote because I thought it took all the romance out of marriage. Like I thought it was saying you could just put any two people off the street together and versus like two people who feel like they were made for each other and madly in love, that like, oh, those two people could fare just as well as the two people who are like in love. But the more I've been married and the longer I've been married, I've realized how true that statement is. And I don't think that's what he's saying. I don't think he's saying you can just take random two people off the street. But I think what he's saying is any married couple, if they're righteous, who are striving to be like Christ and develop Christ-like character, that marriage is going to work.
I think he even says that they need to keep the commandments or their covenants in there somewhere too. So I think, but you're right. It does sound kind of unromantic, right? But it's so true because if you do that, you are tapping in to the strength and power of the atonement, right? And you can now love someone with greater capacity and ability.
And I would argue it's like only two people who are striving to be like Christ, only that marriage is going to work. Like I can't imagine not having a marriage founded on gospel principles and the principles of forgiveness and love and wholesome recreational activities and you know what I mean, all those things that it says in the proclamation. How do you even have a marriage not sustained on those principles, you know?
And I love that. And I think the opposite we talk about celestial versus telestial. Telestial is totally based on selfishness. That's the bottom line is I think when we hear these posts or whatever, people online being like, oh, like it's pure selfishness. It's all what can I get? It's all about me. It's not about ever thinking about your spouse or the other person. And then that's when your marriage implodes for sure, is when
Yeah.
it's, built on pride and selfishness and trying to keep score and making everything fair. That you're right. It's a total telestial. And I love that. We got to start using that now.
Yeah, we do. Maybe before we make some strong sweeping, ideas of how we can implement some of these principles, I probably should say from a mental health perspective that not everyone is married to an awesome, celestial type partner, right? I mean, sometimes we could be married to someone who's really selfish or proud or narcissistic even. In other words, now you have someone in the relationship that's probably not going to give something back, that may only take, and that's where those type of marriages probably need some real professional help. And we just want to recognize that we get that what we're saying today isn't going to apply to everyone. I mean, not everyone is in a position that they can make some of these things happen. And if they aren't, then they probably need to get some help. I remember a few years ago, a sister in our stake wrote me a note and just said, "Hey, what do you do if you've been married for 40 or 50 years and your husband won't change? He just says, 'This is how I am, so deal with it.' Super selfish, super, difficult to live with, very contentious." And really all I could say is good luck. I mean, good luck with someone who doesn't want to work on their marriage and just says this is just how it's going to be. So that marriage needs some real professional help. So we understand that, but now overall there are some things that we can do, right?
Yeah, I would say one of the things I think that we can do is focus on the good instead of thinking of all the things that our husbands don't do or our wives don't do. Let's think about all the things that they do and praise them for those and tell them thank you for those. That'll change our mindset really quickly. When I catch myself going down that rabbit hole of thinking all the unfairness and or whenever I have thoughts of, well, this isn't fair, or why am I doing
Right.
this, or I if I can start thinking about all the things that my husband does do in our marriage, going to work, paying the bills, he gets up with the kids in the mornings, makes lunches, like all the things he does do, then it puts me in my place real quick.
Yeah.
And I start being more grateful for him instead of feeling like things are unfair.
I love that principle. I think that's totally true that when we recognize what we do have and the positives and the efforts that our spouse do make or are making, I love that. We wake up really fast, right?
Yeah.
That's a great one. And I love, Beth, what you said about thanking them because I love the principle that rewarded behavior continues. And the more that we praise our spouse for the good things that they do, I think it makes them then want to do more for us and
Yeah, for sure.
recognize that we
A
are
simple, oh my
appreciative.
gosh, thank you for doing the dishes. That was so helpful. Goes a long
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. A little appreciation goes a long way. I love that.
And if you are ever feeling like you are carrying most of the load and you do feel like your spouse isn't contributing, a simple let's have a sit down and have a conversation about this, and just sharing with your spouse areas where you feel like you could use some help in would go a long way as well.
I agree. Instead of being resentful, is yeah, having that open communication about maybe needs and expectations. I need this from you. I need you to take the garbage out without being asked. I need you to come help with bath time every night or whatever, or I need a night away a week, that just I'm off duty that I can go to a movie with friends or out to dinner or something. And just like I know that you probably need that. But I think communication through all this goes a long way. Instead of just being resentful that they're gone and, internalizing all that. I think if we talk through this and try to work through, and not that I don't think necessarily that it's going to feel fair or equal or feel fair, but not equal necessarily, right? If both partners can come out feeling like, okay, I'm seen, I'm heard. I think having a conversation and working through these, then we can walk out feeling better that, okay, I have these responsibilities, you have these responsibilities. We're going to try and do the best to help each other. We have free time where we can do things that we like. We're going to support each other in those. Then I think that sets the foundation of, a good, healthy marriage.
Yeah, and it's not bad for you to have kind of like set things that are your responsibilities and his responsibilities. I think we for sure have that in our marriage. There's just certain things I do and certain things he does, but it's never like, well,
Never like, well, I'm not doing that because that's your job. If
right.
we were in a crisis or crunch, I'd be happy to step in, if I was able. And I know, vice versa. So,
Another thing, guys, that I would just throw in there is just kind of the empathy that needs to go both directions. Husbands having empathy for their wives. Janie, I still will never forget the first time you left me home with 5 kids under the age of 4.5 because you were going to go out with some women in our ward that night, which was needed. You needed to go do that, and I had those 5 kids for the next 3 or 4 hours, and they worked me over. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, how does she do? I could not do this every day. But and I'm sure you've had experiences like that too. And there are situations where I think there are a lot of husbands, like I think Janie sometimes, if I'm gone a lot with church or work or whatever, it would probably be easy to think, wow, he gets to come and go as he pleases. But maybe sometimes wives don't understand that I don't want to go. I don't want to be gone. I wish I was home. I don't want to miss what's going on in our home tonight, And so I think there's a lot of let's put ourselves in each other's shoes a little bit and try to see it from an empathetic viewpoint for sure.
again, where that charity comes in, that charity and Christ-like, where we try to see the other, through those celestial eyes and not the telestial eyes.
Well, Bethany, thank you so much. We don't always get to have our kids on our podcast, and this has been awesome for Mom and I to be with you today and to kind of hear your viewpoints on some of these things. And so we're just grateful that you would take your time. We know that you're trying to balance. You got one baby in one arm, another baby in the other arm. You're bouncing them all around, and now you have kids coming home from school here in a minute. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for letting me come on. I've gained a new respect for what you guys do. This podcast thing is harder than it looks.
Not always easy, is it? That's for sure.
No.
So we always like to tell our listeners, that LDS, borrowing from Brent Barlow, LDS could mean let's do something. And so, Bethany, what would you say today as we talk about what could we invite our listeners to do?
All right. So as we've talked about the differences between a celestial marriage, a terrestrial marriage, I would say let's look at our own marriages, and during the week, if we ever start having those terrestrial thoughts into our minds about our spouse not pulling their weight or things being unfair, let's try and change our mindset to a celestial mindset and think, how can we turn this around? Can we thank our spouse for something they've done? What are some things my spouse has done this week that I'm thankful for? What can I do to take a load off of my spouse's shoulders? I think if we can all do that this week, that would help a lot.
I think that's great.
I love that. Bethany, thank you so much. Thanks for teaching us. I have a whole new perspective now on terrestrial, telestial, and celestial. So
I do
thank you
too.
for that.
Well, everyone, once again, thank you for being with us today. Have a wonderful week. We look forward to being with you again next time.